Hello, everybody. Welcome to Speaker Sunday. We've got a lot to catch you up on. We attended the Portland Retro Game Con this last Sunday, and we got to meet a bunch of our friends that we've seen in years past, as well as share what we've been working on. So, really happy you're here with us, and we'll get started. So we've got the Lazy Warlock.
Yep, that's me. So for those who don't know, I'm the Lazy Warlock, and I'm the developer and creator of Lords of Nysera, which is still in development and is trucking along at a great pace right now. I do the art, I do the code, etc. And Lilette, who are you?
Hey guys, my name's Lilette. I work on all things YouTube, and I also help out with a little bit of the marketing. I think that's going to be coming this as we get closer to game launch. And then I'm also kind of that person who I get to hear a lot of things firsthand, you know, what he's working on. So we live together, actually, husband and wife. And so I get to test out the game, and we can just kind of bounce ideas off each other. But yeah, Lazy is the sole indie developer. He does literally everything. I'm here pretty much just as support, and I help out where I can.
Yeah, so today we are going to be talking about the convention, how it went, our thoughts after the fact, and what we've been working on. So let's just get right into it. So we've got this slideshow as usual up here. You can see we had a lot of fun at this convention. We actually did, we went to this convention last year as well, but we had a whole booth. So we had the whole 11 by 11 feet booth with like 2 computers going. And it was really fun, but it was really tiring. And it was a lot of work to do that one. And so we actually joined a local indie game club slash nonprofit group, which I've been a part of, but I haven't joined in on their events like this. And I decided to work with them and have my game displayed on one of their booth areas, which they have like a nice big area at the front of the convention. People who come there know that like it's a game testing area for the most part. And yeah, they were super cool people. If you are in the Portland area, check out the Pig Squad if you are either thinking of developing a game, even a small one, or if you're already developing a game, because they have lots of cool resources. They have an awesome Discord to ask questions and work with other devs, and even they have I mean, there's people who work with like crazy cool different types of software and whatnot, so you can learn a ton from these guys. They're really cool. But so to go through these pictures here, you may notice a few things. So it's an indie. It was not just an indie game convention. It was actually a retro game convention where people buy and sell retro old games, right? Not always retro, but usually retro. And there's usually cosplayers too. So Lilette got headlocked by Barry Burton over there, as there was the original cast from the Resident Evil games, I believe, were actually there doing signage and whatnot. It was pretty cool. And so she got to meet him, say hi, and a few of our friends got their games actually signed by them. That was really neat. This next picture you can see is actually the demo that we had up. So we had our new demo that we were testing out, and we wanted to see how well the tutorial worked and how people liked or didn't like the new prologue changes. And we'll get to that in a little bit. The next picture, whoops, no, don't go. We want to stay here. Next picture here is Lilette showing off our good friends and their booth, which they did for the second time, I believe. The Etten Bros at Etten Soft and their game Circus Interstellar. I'm wearing actually one of their shirts right now that I got at the convention exclusive. And they're super cool. Check out their game. We can post a link to all their stuff afterwards, because we got to chat with them because they live in a totally different place. So this is one of the few times we get to see them all year round. So And then the last picture is not me with my cat, but actually the cat room. So there's this cool break room at the convention where you can essentially spend time with kitty cats. And I love cats. And when I saw a bunch of little fluffy white kittens that my wife brought me over to, I was more than down to pet some kitties. So we sat down and hung out with these cuties for a couple minutes and then got back to work. So
Yeah,
those
and
are
we
a few
actually have
little...
like
What was that?
we have like a kitty in the game too. One of
Oh, yeah.
the characters that you designed.
Yes, and so it was pretty fun to kind of have that all tied together. So let's move on and talk about what happened. So we got mostly observations. So the feedback people gave was pretty much positive, but they had a few requests that, like, oh, you should add this, or oh, you should do that, which is very typical, right? I don't think anyone actually got frustrated with the game or upset or anything, which is great. We had a few problems though. So we made this brand new tutorial. It walks you through how to play the game. When I was testing it beforehand, it worked great. And then Lilette tried it out and it seemed to work great. And then as soon as the first person tried it out, the game locked up right after the tutorial. So the tutorial worked really well, but the game essentially soft locked right afterwards. And I tried for like an hour to fix it, but was unable to, so I had to disable it for the rest of the convention, which sucked hardcore. But at least we got to see it kind of work. So I like watch one person essentially go through playing the game without my aid, without me helping them through it, which I usually have to do at these events. So that was at least good to see it working. It's just I need to fix it. So other than that, we made some changes to the prologue, so people who have played the demo are aware of some things about it. We essentially completely revamped the northern area, and people are immediately drawn to it, which is really cool because it is a place you can access, but there's no real big incentive to in the game in the current demo. But with the new demo, there's like a whole new area. There's people to talk to and people that temporarily recruit and so on. It's really, really quite fun actually. And seeing people essentially immediately go to that area was great because it means we did something right. So that was good. We made some changes based off some other people's suggestions. The main enemy in this battle, Yavira, was too easy because she just sits there and lets Artemir sniper. So now she changes her AI, and she actually, after a certain number of the Thracian raiders are defeated, she gets her butt out of that little fort and she attacks you with some of her goons and leaves you behind to defend. So that made it much more challenging, even on normal mode. In fact, there was this little zone right after the first bridge that essentially nobody but a few people got past, and the only way they did get past was by saving the game beforehand and then trying again after they got defeated, because they essentially get ganged up on by people really fast. So it was cool seeing that it's more of a challenge, but it also means it's more of a challenge. So we'll have to make sure that it's not too punishing, but I know for a fact that lots of people, at least on normal difficulty, found that area and especially that boss really kind of too easy. And I very much liked that she seemed like a threat as opposed to just a mook, right? So people really, really liked the Ania's ability as an artificer now to summon units. That was almost always got a whoa out of people as they saw that she could just woo and just summon these little dudes that fight and explode, and they're dispendable, and they immediately saw the tactical value in her now. And just that, like, she's clearly an artificer who has cool things you can use, that she can heal as well when your people start taking damage. So that was a huge plus. I think people really liked that change specifically, even though they didn't know that it was, lots of people didn't know that it was a change. But anyways, the people that did though, who like had actually visited the first time last year and then came back again to check out how we were doing, really liked that. So that was pretty cool. We actually also met a few of the backers, which was also very fun. So they mentioned they backed it, and they've been just like following with bated breath to see what the updates are. Artie was also a very minor change. Well, not minor actually. It's a pretty major change to the overall game, but he still stayed very useful. In fact, there's lots of times where he can outrange enemies and take out certain like archers and crossbowmen and whatnot. but he's not just wiping the floor with every armored unit, so it feels like they actually have some kind of defense against his weapon. And he needs to be supported by other characters, otherwise he just gets like killed way too easily. So that was a nice change. And then for the most part, Cholet is more or less unchanged, other than the portrait. People really like the portrait change, especially people who knew about it as well. And then there were a few changes to like AP, but not people got very far enough to like have any problems with them running out of AP, more or less. So but it still needs a little bit of tuning, because with me playing it, I noticed that he runs out of AP pretty quickly if you just use him to like fight stuff, which you shouldn't be. You should be using all 3 characters. Other than that, feedback wise, people almost always ask about battle animations if they were Fire Emblem fans. This has been probably the most requested and asked about feature, which is why we are making a serious consideration to, if not focus on that for the actual like release, but potentially even hiring out an artist to help fill in the blanks, where I essentially keynote the animations and they help fill in so that we can get it done, because it seems very, very important to people right now. And I think it would really help with the initial release to have at least a basic battle animation system, so it doesn't have to be crazy fancy, which I always get too ambitious with these types of things. So I have to like actively keep myself from giving myself too much work. But if we're able to hire on a little bit of work because of the Kickstarter, we might be able to get it done actually by the release, which we will be talking about in a little bit. As people might have suspected, we're going to be pushing it back a little bit because we want to get, for one, the right number of actual chapters out on the release. We want them tested, and we want to make sure that we have all these like really requested features in the game, because they're clearly gaps that aren't like wouldn't kill the game obviously, but they're things that people immediately want to see. And I think if we can provide those things, it will really help with the positive feedback and the positive reception that the game will get. Among these include just like fixing menus and making sure they're not fighting for space when you're selecting units. That was commented on a lot. For those who don't know what I mean, sometimes when you select a unit, for example, and you move them to go attack someone, it actually the menus will, like for the battle expectations, will actually cover up the enemy you're trying to attack. So I had multiple cases where people were like, where'd they go? Like, I don't know who I'm targeting now. And so that definitely has to be fixed, and thankfully should just be a little bit of fine tuning and finagling with menus and whatnot, and hopefully it just recenters it. Cursor panning, which is moving around the map itself, continues to be a little thorn in my side, because every time I change it, someone says that they would like it changed a different direction. And I think I'm just going to come up with a robust, easy way, not only to change it in the settings, but like to one thing someone actually suggested, I think is a good idea, is being able to pan quickly with the keypad, or not the keypad, WASD. So since it's mostly mouse based right now, using WASD for something would be really useful. And since I have a new panning code made, it would actually not be too bad. I can just punch it into the keyboard and people should be able to move around the map quickly. And then people wanted a map, because it's hard to see, especially if you're just hopping into the demo like they were, what they're fighting. So that's what I did last week, and we're going to get to that. Is there anything I have missed, Lynette, before I move on?
Nope. You were
Cool.
good to go.
All right, then let's do that. So, yeah, these are the most requested features and our progress on what we're essentially focusing on right now. Of course, like the actual maps and chapters are also always something we're working on, but these are the little projects that we want to fix along the way. So the tutorial, essentially the tutorial system is done. I just need to fix it so it actually lets you play after doing the tutorial. But it's essentially moddable and flexible enough that I can apply it to almost any situation, with any type of menu, with any type of outcome or option, to be like, this is how you do this is how you do that, and it walks you through them. So for those who like the tutorial when they start the game, they can just keep it on, and it'll pop up at certain chapters at certain points and be like, oh, this is how you use this feature. And then it'll just leave them alone after that. So, and at any point, if you just like decide to cancel out of it, it'll essentially say, okay, we'll leave the tutorials off, and then it'll, if you want to turn it back on, you can, but you won't be able to turn it on like within a battle because like some of it's kind of scripted. So either way, people also will always have the guidebook, which they can just click on and see like about all sorts of other crap. The mini map is done. So what you're looking at right now on this right side over here is actually the mini map. It's not very mini. This actually takes up most of the screen, but it shows the full map. So and as you can see, it has little unit indicators, and they're animated and they blink. There's also these cool objective indicators. So these will show you where you need to go and what you need to capture or fight or defend, whatever it may be. One functionality I want to add maybe in a little bit is a little tooltip, so that when you mouse over them, it'll say capture this place, or if you mouse over this one, it'll say defend this place. And it's just tied right back to the objectives. So there's also, not shown here, but in the video, there's also buttons down here. So you can toggle off all of these. You can toggle enemies, allies, whichever it may be to show, so that you can find out exactly where the desperate survivors of some battle are trying to escape to, wherever it may be. So it helps remove any clutter that people don't like to see just what they want to see. I really like how it turned out. The hardest part was actually the panning, because you're essentially having a war between the cameras like, no, I want to be here, and then this little panning like window here is like, no, we want to move it here. And so I had to figure out how to make it so that they're not fighting against each other and jittering around. And I mostly got it to work. I might have to fix it a little bit if it turns out that it's not completely done, but otherwise it smoothly lets you just grab it, move around the whole map, release, and then you're right there. So to show how that works, for those who haven't seen it, here's the little video. It's pretty neat. It just shows exactly how it works. Let's skip a little bit. Yeah, so you just click on it. You can see how it switches between all the different units. And then you can just turn units off, so it kind of just cycles through them. The locations one I haven't implemented just yet, because I don't know exactly whether it'll be useful or not, but I had it in there and like functioning, so that if I want to turn off some locations button that shows either capturable locations, so like any gates or villagers that are just capturable and defendable, and then maybe like specific loot sites, so like if there's a treasure chest, right, then it'll show there's a little treasure indicator that says don't let some thief or some person steal it.
I think one of my favorite parts too is that it shows the objective, like the little flag. So helpful.
Yeah, that would be, I think, really important, because then people know, oh, I need to go that direction, and they can see, oh, there's a bridge that lets you get across there, and I'm not going to go this way, right? I might also at some point add in like an option to show where secrets vaguely it might be, right? So like if people are having a hard time finding the secrets, maybe they can find like, I don't know, some kind of fortune teller or something that you can buy like hints as to where the secrets are. I might do something like that, because it would make good use of this map here, where if someone's like, oh, there's something over wherever, I'm gonna send a guy over there to see what it is, right?
I mean, if anything, like if there's just like secrets on the map, it'll just like pop up as a little blip, because it's gonna be optional anyways, and it might even be out of the way. So yeah, we'll just have to see what people prefer, you know.
But this is like, just this view too is really nice for me, because I get to see like how much of the map am I utilizing, right? So if just looking at this here, you can tell the south is really where all the action is. There's the defenders. There's the big army coming towards your allies over here. If you've played through chapter 1, you get reinforcements that come along this little path. But then there's this big corner right here, right, that's essentially unused. And that's okay. And like, because like there's a big ocean area that all there is like this ship that moves along up to here too. So like there can be places that don't have a ton going on, as long as it like makes it look nice and people can see where things are actually happening, right?
Right.
Because clearly, like, there's not any obvious path to get through this, so I'm hoping that kind of deters people from like running through this forest to be like, what's through the forest? Oh, there's nothing. Because I might even set up like barriers in the game that be like, this is a territory you're not allowed in. We'll see. But also it makes me think of like, oh well, maybe I could have like some like flyer reinforcements come in through here and try and attack. So it helps me like visualize actually how much of the map is being used. Usually like I plan this out, right? But this is an older map too, and it's a huge map, so seeing the whole thing in one big picture is really nice.
Yeah, I mean, just making sure that there's not the empty space and making it like its own walking sim, because one of the biggest critiques really of genealogy, which I think this game reminds a lot of people of, is the large maps,
Yes.
So trying to like make sure that you don't frustrate people, but also like there's this certain amount of a lot of fun to be able to free roam too.
Right.
So we do have some commentary in chat right now. So
sure.
We got the Edinburghs in there, and we've got let's see here. Yeah, so they're saying that they love the tooltips, they love the mini maps, and then also the map itself does exactly what it needs to do. Even if it's like bigger,
right,
like having a small floating one would be kind of nice too, so you don't always have to like pull it up.
Yeah, I might have like, I need to again play around with like, because already there's so much stuff in the GUI, right? I need to already minimize how much it interferes with things, but I am gonna see if I can like essentially translate this map into a small little dude that like shows up in the corner maybe and then goes away when you're doing anything important.
Yeah, and it could just be like how a lot of mini maps are, just zoomed in, so you're not going to get the really wide view, which I really like. I like the I like my decisions, just what is available to me, being able to see that right away, and I feel like the big map allows me to see all that I need to know about the battlefield.
Right.
But like having a mini map can be helpful too, to just orient yourself within just a smaller area of the map.
Yep. One other thing I also didn't mention that was a very commonly requested feature is jumping to units that haven't acted yet, which I should have put in the list, but that's going to be essentially what I do next week. So next week is going to be messing around with that and the panning to see if I can improve those, because lots of people are like, I want to be able to find a unit that I haven't used, and again, for me, like, I'm mostly testing, so that's never mattered that much to me. But I know for a fact that people who are playing it want to like maximize their turn, right? So the idea of forgetting a unit and ending your turn is like murder to lots of those min-maxers. So that's definitely got to be a feature, but I need to figure out like the best way to implement it too, because unfortunately, like, I have sort of D&D-ish rules where you can move around and then act, and not every action ends your movement and ends your turn. So I have to figure out how exactly I'm going to do that, but we'll see. So
yeah, I mean, like, even for the non-min-maxers, right? Like, I really like being able to just have a control that, because like pointing and clicking, even though pointing and clicking is more precise, right? I don't always like doing it. Like, to me, it's almost like a hotkey,
Right. So yeah, so we'll see what it is. I don't know exactly what that button will be. It'll hopefully be something that's like, because if people are using the WASD to pan, right, which I do want to do that for sure. Like, if F key is find, right, find an unused unit, then that's a really easy button to just boop, press that to jump to a unit, jump to a unit, jump to a unit until you and I might even have it so that when it jumps to them, it automatically selects them. and then shows you how much movement they have. So if they've used up all their movements and actions, you know, okay, I can't do anything with this guy anymore. But you jump to another one, oh, they have full movement. They can do their whole thing. So we'll be messing around with it, seeing how it goes. Any other comments?
Well, Adam Softy was saying that he's one of the players that will definitely wander into the areas that maybe might not have stuff. So, yeah, I think, and like me too, like I will fall prey to just trying to 100% things because I do not like missing maybe like a cool item. Like, you know, I play through Blazing Blade right now, which is Fire Emblem GBA. All right, so you have these kind of, I guess like a visiting function, right? You can go into a village, visit it, or a town, and you can get stuff from them. The crappy part though is not all the time you get stuff, and so sometimes I will just go and investigate like with my horseman really fast and then figure out which houses or locations has stuff, and then I will restart the chapter and just go only to that one place.
Yeah,
So,
like
I kind of cheese it.
Fire Emblem's kind of funny too because like useless houses will be like brown, right, or yellow, and then anything that has someone who gives you something will be like a red roofed house. So you really only visit the other ones if you want to like get lore snippets or find like interesting little conversations that pop up. But yeah, sometimes like you get junk from them too. So anyways, well, let's move on then. So the big thing that's also going on is the Sword Timber. So the voting is officially done, for the first round at least, and we've got some clear winners. So we got as Lilette described it, the Edgelord sword, which is this very interesting design, which I kind of knew would be at least somewhat high on the list because it's just a fun design. It's, you know, it's this essentially gross messer, two-handed messer looking sword.
I
but
mean, my
it's got
biggest
this...
thing was like, what is like the 4 pieces coming out from the hilt?
Yes, so the 2 big ones are just the hand guard, right? This little curvy bit here is actually a thumb guard. So that's really common on sort of late Renaissance-ish or early Renaissance, I'm not sure which, swords. And then these extra 2 bits here. So this sword is actually, it ends right there. So you can maybe barely see it with the mouse, but just barely above that little pink stripe is actually where the physical like hard blade ends. This flowy dark stuff essentially is pooled in a reservoir that's filled in like this brass bracket thing here, and all the way through this is actually a horn right here. So this bone / horn is actually filled with this black fluid, and it closes with a little clasp. So there's a little button here that presses and opens it to essentially pull it all back into the handle. So this is a type of ferrofluid that's being controlled with magic to form an original blade shape. So there's some magic shenanigans going on, but essentially this is the actual like short little teeny knife sized blade actually, and then it forms the blade from this liquid stuff. So that's what these little extra bits are. They're kind of also like entrapping mechanisms, but really they're just there to close this up when it flows back in, so
Okay,
that it
that
doesn't
makes sense, 'cause
leak
that's
out
like-
or interfere with anything. So
I was getting
pretty...
Star Wars flashbacks to like the hilted. I mean, that's I think, but aside from the black stuff that coats the blade and, you know, is really like Dark Lord edgy.
Yep.
Like the extra. I thought it was an extra hilt, so, you know, I just.
I mean,
couldn't help
it looks like an extra. Yeah, it does look like an extra hilt. Just like, what's better than a handguard? Another handguard, right?
It just, yeah, it just looks so extra.
Yeah, but it's cool. I don't know if it would actually be practical. Like I've heard lots of people say when it comes to making swords and whatnot, right? That the more complex it is the more likely it's gonna like fail and actually not work. So,
But I had a feeling though that everyone would vote for it though. I was like, oh no.
it just
Yes.
looks cool. Like in general, I think the design itself was just like, not to like pat myself on the back, right? But the color combination is really nice. I really like contrasting black with this like
Oh yeah, like it's like
neon
this
pink,
pinky.
which
Yeah.
like in the game this is neodymium, which they don't call it that, but it's this very very rare metal in Nysera that is in the real world and in this world. It's one of the most like magnetically powerful metals that you can use. It's actually used in like teeny speakers for your phones and whatnot, because like a tiny little bit of neodymium can essentially move a woofer. So cool stuff. And in this case it lets it essentially form a slightly remembered shape of this ferromagnetic material that will, even when like if it like moves off of it, it'll reform back into it. So it's a very exotic weapon. Like this is not a common weapon in Nysera. In fact, all these weapons are one of a kind, made by a specific guy. So they're all weird, unique items that you won't find multiples of in the game or the world for that matter. And something like this is very finicky. You have to, for one, like you do lose bits of this ferromagnetic material, so it has to be refilled. If the latching mechanism breaks, then you have to repair it. All sorts of crap, right? So these are held by like not only collectors lots of the times, but people who are just like they've like essentially picked this weapon and they've dark souled it, right? Where it's like, I'm going to use this weapon the rest of my life because it's unique to my fighting style. And so that's the case, especially with this type of weapon. So anyways, this was the most voted for of all three groups. So it absolutely blew the others out of the water in the first group, which is fine. Like I think if people really like it, I voted for it. I had some designs I kind of like this one because it's neat, but this one just is like objectively the best looking of the swords in that group. Moving on to the second group. So this one I was surprised actually did as well as it did, but I guess people really like rainbow swords because to me, so this one's kind of probably hard to read as to like what's going on with it, but it's essentially kind of similar to this one, funny enough. And I found that was very interesting that people picked swords that both had kind of a flamey looking chaotic aspect to it, but this one is actually not liquid or on fire. It's actually solid metal. And the story behind it is essentially that this chaotic rainbow looking stuff is a type of bismuth based steel called spiral steel. And spiral steel is notorious for being used by a specific group of people that they would essentially pour this liquid over their bodies or weapons, and it goes crazy. It's just this like roiling mass of energy and metal that just eviscerates things when they hit it with it, and they can control it with magic, but it's transient, so it just will literally, after kind of burning out, just sort of dissipate and sometimes just like pour onto the ground, and it just like squirms away. It's really weird stuff. And even in the world, people are like, no, I don't mess with spiral steel. It's really strange, and it's hard to use because you make it and then it's a one-time use for like a battle, and then you have to get more of it. And people have found that like it keeps disappearing and nobody knows where it's going actually, because it has kind of a mind of its own. So there's some mystery behind it. But this sword maker, Kamuli, he thought, well, I want to try and tame this metal because it's really useful, it's really powerful, but nobody likes to use it anymore or very much because doesn't stick around. So he went exploring and looking for essentially metallurgists who had dealt with similar metals or who worked with specifically order-based metals. In this case, nickels. Like nickel-based metals are the order metal in this case. And he found these people called realm hunters, which you meet one character is one, and their sword is like this really nicely ordered, almost pristine, perfect sword. And they're indented with a specific type of stone that essentially keeps it honed perfectly. So honing, for those who aren't sword nerds like me, is just the straightness of your sword. So when you hone a sword, you're actually just making sure that it's not bent and wobbly or even just like slightly warped. So these swords, they stay essentially like really nicely sharp, really nicely straight, and they don't get bent or wobbly because they have magic that keeps them that way. So Kamuli thought, well, what if I try and combine those two aspects? So if I use the stones that help orient the sword, but then I essentially make it out of spiral steel, what will happen? And the result was this weapon. So he essentially, you can see there's parts of it that are still straight. So it worked to keep it in line. And then I'm going to write up a cool little excerpt on it. But essentially, like when he was making it, the sword almost he describes it as realizing what he's trying to do to it. And it squirmed and tried to wriggle away all this metal. Whoops. Oops. Nope, go back. And the result is that as soon as he finished it, it froze in this shape. And so this is just a jagged mess of spiral steel, more or less, that has kept its form as it tried to escape and just go off into wherever. So parts of it are still a blade, parts of it are just spiky mess of stuff. But otherwise, it's still a weapon. But you can see how not everyone would like a weapon like this, right? Because it may not cut very well, and most people would be kind of freaked out by a weapon like this. So the people who have it in the game, probably it's their favorite little sword, and maybe it's not great at, cutting bamboo sheaths in half, but it has weird properties that no other sword in the world has. So that's this one. So this was a really close second. I was actually really surprised how close this one, because Group 2 had some pretty interesting designs that I thought people would pick up on. And then the third group. So these actually tied, and I was pretty happy because I liked both of these. I actually like this coral blade a lot more personally. This was just a really fun design for me. I just kind of went wild with it, and so to give a little background with how this went, I essentially rolled dice on all of these. I rolled dice to see what design it would what cultural design it would resemble. I rolled a dice to see what metal it would be made of. And then I rolled how strange it was. So just how weird, right? How obscure it was. And then I rolled on the length and the handedness. So whether it's one-handed, half-handed, or two-handed. So funny enough, this one right here maxed out strangeness. So this was a 12 out of 12 strangeness. This one here was, I think, 11 out of 12 for strangeness. It might have even been 12 as well. This one was, this was like a 10 out of 12. And then this guy was a 1, actually. So this was supposed to be a very orderly looking, normal kind of mundane thing, but the metals were really interesting. So I thought that was curious how people really like the obscure, strange numbered ones, which is cool. The background on these guys, so because they're tied, we still have to decide on them. So I figured it would be fun, since these guys are tied here, that during the stream we would vote on which of the two we are going to vote on. So if you want the coral one, then you vote for coral. If you want this guy here, this is made of it's called meteor steel. So meteor is in streaking through the sky. So if you want coral, then you do coral. If you want meteor, you do meteor. And just type it into the chat either. I guess, can we count, because this is on YouTube as well, right, Lilette?
I just realized my mic is off for Discord, so sorry about that.
Oh no.
No, it's okay. I mean, it went on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Just fine, but yeah, sorry. Repeat your question again.
So my question was, people, I guess we have this on Discord and YouTube, right? Are we able to collect votes from both of them if we just read through the chat? Because not everyone is on both, right? Usually people are one or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're on YouTube, you could probably just comment in and we'll see it. So I guess that is how you could cast your vote too.
Yep. So the deal is essentially this, of these, right? Group 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, Edgelord is going to be in the game. Rainbow Sword going to be in the game. These you vote for. One or the other will for sure be in the game. The other one, the one that is not voted for, will go into the runner-up category that's going to be voted on again. So it's the second round voting, more or less. So yeah, to repeat, we're doing a quick vote to see which of the 2 tied ones from Group 3 will progress, and which will go to the runner-up. So if you want the Coral Blade, which is this blue guy here, vote Coral. If you want this cool black sword here, you vote Meteor. So to give you a little idea on which one is which, and what they're made of, this guy here, the Coral one, people who have found the sword have described as if it was literally grown out of the surf itself. So the blade material is called wake steel. So it's a really interesting metal that's essentially made from a mixture of cobalt and steel. So it's actually one of the few steels that is made with steel. It's not super unique in that it does anything specific. It doesn't like turn people to water when it slashes through them, but it's very, very pretty. That's what most people remark on. Like, it's not unusually strong, it's not unusually powerful or durable or even sharp, but it is one of the most beautiful metals for any artisan out there, because you can essentially bring out all sorts of hues of blue and silver in it, and obviously like it looks like some crazy looking nacreous inside of a mollusk. So it's one of the most beautiful materials to work with, but it also has a very unique aspect in that it almost floats in water, in that it's like practically weightless in water. So it's one of the most popular armor and weapons for sailors, because if you fall off in a raid, for example, off your boat into the water, you're not just gonna sink all the way into the water. You're essentially floating around as if you had like a slight floaty with you. So it'll actually keep you above water if you have certain types of wake steel. So people sometimes they decide like, well, I'm a magician and I have my underwater castle or something, I want to just move through water quickly, or they want to float so they don't drown. So there's different variations of wake steel that are used. Now Kamuli also essentially designed like this handguard from coral. So he's from Kuldar, so this is going to be a lot of lore stuff, but Kuldar is essentially, it's called the Heartland. It's a landlocked area in the center of the northern continent, and lots of it's desert, lots of it's jungle, but for the biggest part about it is that there's no ocean nearby. So Kamuli, the guy who designed all these, is from there, and so he was always a little wary of the ocean until he went to a coral reef, and he absolutely fell in love with the beauty and the organic like vibrance of it. And so he decided to make essentially this blade as if it was grown from the first reef he visited. So I can't zoom in super close, but we'll post, like, you can zoom in on the images. So this was just like me kind of going wild with like, what can I add to this crazy looking sword?
And
so there's even like a little
too.
nautilus shell down here. Like the handle has like a nautilus shell that curves into essentially like a type of bony looking, maybe like a a tusk or something, like maybe it's a walrus tusk, and then it looks like it's grown into this hunk of coral that's shaped like a handguard, so like one of those cool cage guards on a sword, like almost like on a buccaneer sword. So it's like probably the fanciest looking pirate sword you could imagine.
And we have some questions.
Sure.
Okay, so do these special swords have like poison, fire, freezing properties of any kind?
Yeah, so lots of these materials do. So in the case of these, I need to decide on like what specific effects they have in the game, right? For example, this the Edgelord blade, I don't have a name for it just yet, but this one will probably it's a two-handed sword, so it will have two-handed sword properties with like reach and whatnot, but its innate properties will probably be along the lines of it essentially just passes through armor, or it can ignore certain benefits of armor, right? Like this ferrofluid will probably just like glide right under plates and whatnot, right? So like if you slash it through someone, like you imagine it would form along the contours of a plate and then slide underneath them or something like that, you know? Or it's a nanomolecule that can just part steel so easily. Who knows what exactly that will be? But there are tons of effects that swords can have, like all weapons, not just swords. So every one of these metals, so there's like, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but when I said that I roll for the metal type, what I was actually rolling for is of the 12 different types of metals in the game. So there's 12 elements, and as people say in the game and in the world, if you find something magical, there is 11 other things of it. So if you find a magical ingot that catches on fire, right, there's probably 11 different ingots of something that do all those different elements. And that's the case with weapons. So lots of these are made with really interesting metals, and they have consistencies throughout all the weapons that they're made of. So there will be a weapon out there that's made of wake steel, maybe not in this shape because they're like in Maya, for example, where they've perfected the use of wake steel, they would have a different method of making a sword than Kamuli did. So this one will be a unique one. It'll probably be a higher quality. It does a little more damage, and maybe it has like a special trait to it, right? But to answer the question, yes, there's all sorts of traits. There's essentially a trait system for all items. So all items can have up to 3 innate traits that are just baked into the weapon itself, and then they can be augmented with 3 other traits. So you can even take like a regular boring ass, iron sword, right? Or arming sword as they're called in the game. And you can, if you have the right technology in game through research, you can turn that into a flaming sword, right? And it will catch things on fire when you whack them with it, and it'll change the animation and so on. But you don't want to waste that on a crappy sword, obviously. And then there's some that conflict. So like you can't use flame enchantments or flame augments on wake steel, for example. It just doesn't work very well. But some also work. Some will also produce different effects. So if you try and do it with something that's electrically aspected, it forms what's called arc fire. And arc fire is essentially the name for plasma in the game. So they don't like. I try not to use real world names like shoot a plasma bolt at somebody. They don't know what plasma like technically is, right? The people have ideas who are in the science world, but they wouldn't call it that. So there's lots of cool artificing, augmenting combinations you can do in the game. And so I'll have to think about like, what do each of these items do eventually to like really differentiate them, right? And sometimes they're just fun to make them. Like, I don't think everything always needs to be super unique, right? Like this one right here, this meteor steel one, it's probably going to be a heavy ass sword because meteor steel is notoriously really heavy, and it'll probably do a lot of damage, but only someone who's got really good strength will be able to make the best of it. So, and to talk about that, like this guy here is designed, actually this was a really interesting one because it was the very last sword I made. And what I did was I tallied up all the different combinations of metal and style, and I looked at which ones either rolled the least or didn't roll at all. And in this case, the metal that was not rolled at all was meteor steel, and the style that was never rolled at all was the Valkyrie Evallon style, which is a very, very rare style in general because they just didn't make many swords. And so that was a really interesting one to do as the very last one. So the Valkyrie, essentially, they're not smiths, they're magicians. Like wholesale, they're just magicians. They do not really care for weapons because they see them as sort of primitive and not very useful. That wasn't until some of them started realizing that weapons, not only are they are useful in some ways, but they can be used as vessels for artifacts, and to double as a weapon. And so once they picked that up, they realized they could amplify their own powers in lots of cases through various weapons, either using them as just a conduit or as an artifact, whatever it may be. And so they started making essentially really simple swords. And this one, I think it's funny that so many people voted for it because every time I look at it, I feel like the lines are bad because I know I messed something up with the lining in it, but it looks fine, right?
Yeah, Lake from chat says that it looks like a sword you'd find in Lord of the Rings, or like something that Vikings would use. And I can kind of see that because it looks like there's some kind of inscription in the middle, and it looks very Viking-like,
Yeah, so this is runic astral right here. So this is actually written in the language I've made for the game. So this is Evallon right here is essentially what people call it, or mythic. This little symbol you see all over the place, this bottom guy here, this is just Kamuli's mark. So this is just what he uses to symbolize work he makes. He doesn't always put it on everything. Sometimes he doesn't want to, because he doesn't want it to be a symmetrical looking blade. He wants it to be like clearly like evoking some imagery, like in this case the ocean. He wants it to look like it was like grew out of the side of a coral reef, more or less. But yeah, so part of how Envallons made their weapons is essentially it's a solid piece of metal. Usually there's almost no interlocking parts, there's no screws, there's no like forging them together. Typically when they make it, it's like they might have individual pieces, but it all becomes a singular piece of metal through magic. So there's no moving parts whatsoever inside of it, and there's no interlocking parts. That's really hard for someone who doesn't have magic as their like way of forging things, right? So this was a real challenge for Kamuli, because he essentially had to work with you can't cast meteor steel, for example. So like there's some things you can cast in a solid piece, but meteor steel you can't. You actually have to fold it with literal meteoric iron. Oops, go back. Sorry, every now and then I click something because I'm on push to talk. And so he had to figure out how to essentially make this single thing from a piece of metal. And that's why it kind of is all the same color, because that's the style of the Valkyrie. Now this white stuff here is actually just a layer of it essentially engraved away and then filled with a specific type of material. So they essentially engrave it, and then it's like a if people know what an amalgam is, it's essentially like a mercury mixed with silver or any precious metal, and then you can fill it in with stuff because it becomes soft, and then you bake it out and it leaves behind the stuff. So that's how you essentially name an item in the world, is you use this specific type of material and you name it. And in this case, it was one of his very last swords he ever made. And it was the hardest sword he ever made. Like all the other ones like were experimental, but this one was so difficult for him because he had to essentially carve it. He had to carve it out like a piece of stone from this ingot, and then somehow sharpen it. And so he called this one, I don't have the name exactly off the top of my head, but the inscription essentially means highest mountain. So it's his zenith weapon. So it's actually not his best, it's not his most powerful weapon. He made like relics and whatnot for people and whatnot that would eventually become crazy powerful, but he felt like this was his hardest sword to make. So that's what that all means. And these symbols are essentially just the different letters that they use, and they all mean different. They all have like different consonants or sounds that they make that I made up. So this was really fun. I actually got to write out the language and move it around and squeeze it until it fit onto the blade. And then these little diamonds are essentially, they represent in Envallon, they essentially mean idea, so, or concept. So when they speak to each other, they say this is like, it's literally like, this is my concept of this thing. So that's what those little diamonds mean. So yeah, I'm gonna let people continue to vote on these. Anyone who's jumped in recently, these guys tied, so we're doing a runoff vote in chat. You can do it either on YouTube or in Discord. Vote Coral for the left guy, vote Meteor for the right guy, if you for either one to progress to the progress. The other one will go into the runoff for the other ones, which we're about to show off. So these guys were the runner-ups. These are essentially all the ones that got more than one vote, except for a few that got 2 votes that got pushed out. So these were like, I'm not going to go into details on all these guys, but I was sort of surprised that some didn't make it and that some of these did, because some of them I thought were like cool designs, but not too interesting. Like, and not to like, you know, poo-poo on anyone's opinion, because I liked all the swords that I made, but some just stood out more to me. Like, I was surprised this Mabele guy here didn't get more votes, because I thought it was really cool and I had a ton of fun drawing that one, and they got like 3 votes, which is like, okay, that's fine. I know you guys like probably liked it. And then some of them like I expected to get more votes as well. Like this guy here, I just like the symmetry and kind of look of it, and it did pretty well. This guy I was not expecting to get any votes, because I guess people really like the armor slayer looking thing. I don't do these designs very often because they, for one, did not exist very much at all in like our history. But there are very specific types of, they're called executioner swords, that were not used for fighting. They were used for executing people. But there's a group of people in my world who do like using them for fighting because they don't duel. They just like the raiders, and so an executioner sword works great for fighting unarmored people. So this is a variant of that thing, but it's not even actually magical. It's just literally a scary looking weapon, but it's one-handed too, so it's like probably pretty cumbersome, but it's kind of neat looking. I expected this frosty looking guy to do a lot better, and it still got some votes, but I was thinking it would be up there in the mix, but it made it to the runner-ups, so that's still pretty cool. And then the rest, like, I won't again go into all the details. I was surprised that this one got as many votes as it did because it seemed like one of the most simple designs, and it's intentionally so because it's essentially so this was fun because I was talking about how the Envallons make their swords. So he actually worked with an Envallen in this case to make this one because he wanted to make it from silver wood, which is essentially magic made into a tree, and then the metal here, Valagith. So they essentially fuse them together using the resin of the silver wood, and it becomes a singular piece of essentially magic steel. So it was a very simple design, but it's got these cool little like etch marks in them because of the material it's made of. So it was simple, elegant, but I wasn't expecting it to win 6 votes. So still pretty cool. So yeah, other than that, these are the runner-ups. Like I said, the previous one, whichever between the meteor and the coral one doesn't get voted on, will get put into this, and so it might still win. Who knows? But we'll see.
All right, and then let's check out chat here. So
yeah, this is it. So I don't think there's anything else. Nope. So we'll just drop back to here.
All right, cool. So the yellow flamey one is really catching one of. If you go back to the so
this guy here.
Yeah. So if you can kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that was. So I was also expecting this one to do a little better because I thought it was one of the most unique designs. So essentially, this one uses. So Kamuli was really fascinated with the different types of cultures and how they make their swords, and what like effects they have based off their local materials or materials that they value that they put into their swords. So he particularly was liked Irvani weapons, which I've mentioned before, is where like Sholay comes from. So Irvani nowadays are really rare, but before the events of Lords of Nysera, they were not. They were everywhere because they essentially had a whole other continent to the east that they dominated. And so Kamuli, even though he was Kuldari, and the Kuldari didn't really care for the Irvani very much, they had like minor skirmishes with them. He kind of didn't care about that because he cared about swords, and so he wanted to work with an Irvani to essentially make a sword that even if it was broken would be able to reform itself, or if anything remember what it was. Because there's these metals in the world that kind of, that's their shtick, is like they will sometimes, like we said, reform or hone themselves. And so this was made with similar materials, but it also included aspects of essentially what people in the world call a rune sword. So a rune sword is something that can project magic out of it from the material itself. So like, well, anyways, I won't go into too many details about it. It's kind of like ticky-tacky. But
and how about the tangleweed one? Like the one that looks like it's like an antler.
Which one?
The one that looks like a deer's antler.
This guy down here?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that has a funny story as well. So, anyways, to summarize this guy real quick, essentially, it worked. So he made the blade, but then when he tried to finish it, it broke. So the material he was working with, it just snapped off, and he was kind of disappointed because it didn't regrow. But then a day later, he noticed there was this magic field around it that still held the shape of the sword, and it still cut as if it were a sword, just differently because it was using magic. So it's sort of this half magic, half metal sword now because the top of it broke off and he couldn't remeld it back on. A lot of people don't realize that, but it's actually really hard to reforge a blade like they show in the Lord of the Rings, where it's like, let's just heat the pieces together and whack it a few times. It doesn't work that way. It's really hard to reforge a blade like that, and most smiths would just as soon move on to make another sword. And so that was the case in this one, except it turned out to be partially like this. So he wondered if you broke it off at the bottom, if it would just be a floating magical sword like that. And again, I don't know what the actual stats of this weapon would be, but lore-wise and like kind of just world-wise, really fun. So this antler-looking guy here. So this is based off of there's this type of throwing knife slash sword called a mabele. It's got a few names. There's another name for it that I'm blanking on right now, but mabele is what I know it as. Also like a kapinga, I think is what it's called. And they come in like crazy different styles. They're really, really neat, and I've seen people throw them. They essentially use this like center area to balance, and they just spin around like a saw blade, and because they've got all these sticking points, they can stick into stuff really easily. But they're also like a weapon, so you can swing and hit someone with it. So essentially Kamuli was invited to a mabele making contest where people could essentially come up with the most creative designs, and there were rules. It had to be able to fly like a mabele, and it had to be essentially forged in a single piece, right? And it had to be made in like a certain number of days. So he was invited to this competition, and he thought, well, I've worked with what's called true silver, and true silver is really light, really sharp, and really durable. And it's also really easy to meld pieces of it onto itself. So he actually cast this piece in a single piece and then like wore it down, and then which is so what true silver essentially absorbs magic right into it, and it just bleeds right off of it. So it has this kind of glowy fire, which is called like astral fire, is just sort of always pluming off of it. So he won the competition obviously because it's just this like crazy looking glowing on fire blade, and it flies. So but I think the problem was that I don't remember what I wrote down some notes on this guy, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. But essentially, like he didn't like using it though because holding it was too bright next to him. So it was like a spectacle weapon, but he said it wouldn't be good for keeping it around because like they're specifically used, at least in the world, as like sneaking weapons. So like you're literally up in a canopy, you see some invader coming in, and you throw your mabele down and hit them with your with the spinning sword that can like spin back around and come back to you. But if it's glowing bright like that, it doesn't work as well. So that's the story behind that guy. And they're real things. So this is actually just my own design of a mabele that I like looked at this wall of them online, and I was like, okay, I get the sense. I'm gonna not use that as a reference and just come up with my own and see how it compares. And originally I made it too long, so like the handle here was too long. And I noticed that lots of them have like essentially the central, I don't know what you call it, like they're almost shaped like a vague wheel, right? Where this is the center and then these are the spokes. So they have to be balanced around that middle. So I kind of reshaped it a little bit. And it turns out like it's this like short little blade, right? So part of the what I rolled for it was it's one-handed and very short. I got a 1 and a 1. So that's why it turned out this short. But yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, let's see. When do these swords, when can you play with them in the game?
Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting thing. When do I introduce some of these, right? If they're pretty much simple blades, you'll probably find it early on. But I'm thinking lots of them will actually be side quests. So they will essentially be either challenges or they'll be loot, right? So as far as the winners go here, right? This water one, as pretty as it is, if it won, I could introduce that pretty early into the game, actually, because it's probably not going to have overwhelmingly good stats. The one on the right is actually probably very good, but just requires like a high-level unit to use it. Between these two, I don't know where they will fall stat wise. No matter what, all of them are specialized weapons. So especially these two, they would have high stat, like they would have high mastery requirements. So they would probably be like at least A or S tier weapons. And then they would be specialized. So if you don't have high enough masteries, you essentially suck with that weapon. It's not useful to use it. But I would say probably, I actually know, I have a pretty good idea of where this one would come in. This would come in probably at roughly halfway through the game. So it would actually show up towards the very end of the alpha release. So around like chapter 11 or 12. So people would get to play with this sword in the game on the initial release. This guy here, this would be a fun one to find in Arceus. So about like a fourth of the way through the game to maybe find it, but then not be very useful until someone's high enough level to use it. So this would definitely be a side quest item. Either someone's looking for it or you find it in some crazy ruins. I have a few places I can think of. Because again, like, these are all made by one guy, right? And he's long dead. He's not alive in this game. He was alive what's called pre-severance. So before essentially crazy stuff happened, all the story events, apocalyptic jazz, right? That was roughly 300 years ago, or like a little over 100 cycles, as people would call it. It's actually more like 400. And so it's been a long time since this guy's been dead. And so he's not making new swords, but people are imitating his styles. So some of these will actually not be true Kamulis, as they would be called, but instead they were inspired by them. So I imagine like this guy right here, I really like the design, but it doesn't evoke like a really strong, like this is a unique sword sort of thing, right? And so this will probably just end up being a style of sword that a specific group uses because they saw a Kamuli and they're like, that sword looks great, we're going to turn that into like our standard frontline two-handed sword fighter type sword, right? So there's some that will be inspired by Kamuli, some that are literally made by him, and you'll always know because there's the marking, right? Unless it's a fake, so there are fake Kamulis out there as well. But yeah, I expect people will be able to get most of these by around at least the halfway point in the game, or if it's like something like this, which is a really specialized, like heavy ass weapon, right? Like it'll be one of the heaviest swords in the game probably, even though it's single-handed. That would be a late game weapon just because you would need someone who can actually lift it. And then as far as these guys go, that's a total toss-up. Again, if they're simplest, like more simple looking ones that inspire swords, then they'll be much more readily available. If it's one like this guy here, the broken one, that would be another quest related one where you go find it, or there's someone in a battle that has it on them that is either an ally, because there might be some swords that show up in the game, maybe, that it's just like a specific character sword that they're not part of your team. They just have it because that's the sword that they have, and that's the lore of the world, right? It's like this person just has this cool blade. Like this Frost one, even if it doesn't win, I just love the design, and I'll probably find a way to implement something similar like it into the game. So
yeah, I think that's what I love most about the game is it's pure creativity. You have pretty much whatever is in your mind as far as what you want to create, you can do so. And that is what I really enjoy about the uniqueness of the items is I've just never seen them before. You know, it's not like the same old medieval weapon stuff. And you've done a lot of research too about blades in general. Like you've done armor studies and such, and you've also done weapon studies, and like I know you've got several books on it too. So it's just really cool to learn all the different kinds of blades out there that have existed, because some of these are like came from, like I can kind of spot from this array right here, like you've taken it from inspiration of real blades. So, and like when you showed me all of the blades that have existed before, like we've gone through so many iterations of weaponry. We have really interesting stuff. Like if you just Google online, like what are some strange looking blades, you will find them immediately, and you'll find a lot of them.
Oh yeah, there is weird looking stuff out there. So for every like blade, like fantasy blade, right, that looks ridiculous, there is a real world weapon out there that somebody made that is even more ridiculous. And they weren't always popular, right? But someone usually made them, right? Like I didn't even do like some outlandish things. Like I could have done like the punch dagger guitars if I wanted to, or like I think like really overused things like I don't even do a whole lot of wavy things like people who've seen like flamberges or Chris knives, right? Like they have this little wavy shape to them, like this guy right here. That's like I barely play around with those even much because for one they're hard to draw and even harder to pixelate. But there's so many cool designs out there, and I try to keep my stuff relatively like not mundane, but like close to reality, right? Like this stuff is really outlandish for like my work, right? And it's funny that people really like these because they're cool and they're really distinct looking, right? But they don't look, because like I like to think of, lots of people complain about like Skyrim, for example, the Daedric weapons. The Daedric weapons are like these jagged, nightmare-looking, crazy-ass swords. Some of them are these, like, they call them paddles because they're so fat and big-looking that they don't look like real swords, right? And I try to make my weapons look like, yeah, someone could swing that. Like, that seems like, even if it's a little weird-looking, made from a strange material, maybe the color doesn't look right for, like, a regular steel weapon, but that looks like a weapon you could swing and actually do damage with and fight in combat with. That's cool, at least. Same with armor. Same with like all weapons in the game. There's supposed to be like a modicum of realism first, and then magic and fantasy and world building afterwards. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this Speaker Sunday. So we can answer, of course, any questions afterwards. But pretty much just wanted to catch you guys up on how things went with the convention, this sword stuff, because I spent the whole month. I essentially did like roughly an hour a day, usually when I went to bed, doing a sword a night. And so it's really the first art competition, like not competition, art challenge I've ever completed. And I'm probably going to do more like this. It would actually, I think it would be fun to do a vote too on what I do for the next month. So I won't be doing any this month because I got a lot more work to do. But I think probably November, I will probably do another challenge like this. So I'm going to put to the vote, what should I do? Should I do bows? Should I do axes? Whatever may be, right? So we'll come up with that later and let everybody know. But I really loved doing this for like my own personal just enjoyment of designing things, doing the lore and the world building, but also just coming up with weapons, right? Like coming up with items in the game that could be items in the game, and they're all actually designed in the format of how I would essentially turn it into pixel art. So they have like the positioning and angle that's easy enough to put in. Who knows how they'll translate to pixel art? Like this one is super detailed, right? And I don't know if like all the little licking metallic bits will work, but we'll see.
Yeah, and then honestly, art is a huge part of just your workflow. Like, otherwise it would just be full-on coding. And I think art has always just kind of been something you do like in between things too. So yeah, I mean, like it's just like been fun watching you make these swords. So. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And again, leave your vote in the comments below and your questions, and we'll get to those and answer them in chat. And yeah, otherwise, have a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining us.
Yep. Thanks, guys, and we'll chat with you later. Bye.